David's life was one of triumphs mixed with personal failures, recurring political and military uncertainty, and betrayal by his son Absalom. All of these aspects of his life were events and developments within the larger narrative of God's grace. The Lord established David's kingdom, using him to band together God's people to form the strongest military power in the Middle East at that time. It was through David that God settled his people as a nation among the Middle Eastern nations, spreading the Israelites' territory from Egypt to the Euphrates River. Eventually, God gave David rest from his military conquest, affording the war-hardened king the opportunity to look to the future. David's desire was to build a temple for the Lord, yet this was not God's plan. Rather than implementing David's good intentions, God made it clear to Nathan that his desire was much larger. He had positioned his people, through David's leadership, to be established forever. God's vision was to establish and fulfill promises that he had made to his people as they came out of Egypt through a covenant with David's heirs. David's son Solomon would solidify the Jewish nation forever, as well as build a house for God's name. David's prayer in verses 18 through 29 concludes by showing his response to the Lord. David expressed his humble response to God's promises, which ultimately unfolded fully in the New Testament through the birth, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. These promises revealed God's larger acts of redemption as recounted by David. It was here that David realized his significant contribution to the Lord's grander scheme. God had used David's life and work as a piece of a much larger puzzle that is revealed over the course of the entirety of Scripture, God's story of redemption. God enabled David to see his glorious plan to establish a kingdom for himself that through David's heirs would be unending. Those promises were fulfilled initially during Jesus' earthly ministry and established finally when Jesus was crucified and defeated death. Jesus was called the Son of the Most High, given the throne of his forefather David, and promised a kingdom with no end. Clearly, Jesus was the one through whom God finalized his covenant promises to David. Whereas other heirs of David sinned, failed, and eventually died, Jesus proved to be the ultimate heir, living a perfect life and defeating sin and death.